Welcome to Pluralsight's mini podcast series highlighting individuals that have broken into the tech industry via non-traditional methods and backgrounds. I'm Josh Ruggles with Pluralsight, and I'm joined by Cassidy Williams, Director of Developer Experience at Netlify. Thanks for joining us, Cassidy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's kick things off and just start by tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to where you're at?
Ooh, there's the long version and the short version, but the short version is I started teaching myself how to code when I was a teenager on accident because I heard a neighbor say that they could code, and I was like, wait, what? And I didn't even know that was a possibility. And after teaching myself a bit, I started taking coding classes. Then I ended up going into a traditional computer science degree, and I've mostly been at startups since then. I did a few stints at larger companies as well, but long story short, I have ended up at Netlify.
That's a good short version. Do you have anything you want to add that's maybe from the long version that adds some context?
Yeah, and so I guess the roles that I've mostly taken on since learning how to code have definitely been around kind of education and advocacy for developers. Because I love the idea of someone being able to take something like I did when I was 13, although I had significantly less resources then, and being able to give them what they need to take it and run with it and be successful with a given piece of tech. And so in school, I was mentoring and leading other students in like the peer learning community and the computer science club and stuff. And then in each of my jobs, I've done some sort of developer relations sort of thing. And so my first role, I was a combo software engineer and developer advocate, and I was helping developers use our APIs and supporting hackathons and stuff. And in my next role, it was at a startup, and I was doing still half engineering, half advocacy, but definitely leaning more into the advocacy side, where I was going to hackathons and conferences and meetups and speaking a lot and showing developers what they could do. In my next role, it was a pure engineering role, and I also was a tech lead and engineering manager. And I really loved that, but I was definitely missing interacting with developers a bunch, and so a lot of the stuff I did was just open source and outside of work. My next role was at Amazon, which was a very big behemoth, and that I was back being more involved with developers again, but I kind of missed the startup atmosphere. And so I swung in the complete opposite direction of going from a mega large company like Amazon to a small company, CodePen, of 8 people. And CodePen was a very developer focused company. It was really awesome being able to make tools for developers to play around with it and a lot of code newbies. And as I was working there, once again, I wanted to be even more involved with the developer ecosystem and interacting with developers more. And so after that, I went to teach developers full time. And I was teaching developers full-time, traveling a ton, teaching workshops, and really just helping developers wherever I could. And then the pandemic happened. And in the pandemic, unfortunately, our company went under, and they had to lay off all staff. And that's how I ended up at Netlify. And at Netlify, I'm Director of Developer Experience, and I focus on making resources for developers to write React and Next.js better.
COVID was definitely a sort of a wake-up call, I think, and
yeah,
a lot of people had to shift and change jobs, change roles, all those type of things. So it's definitely been an experience for everyone to learn from. I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about your mechanical keyboards.
Yes. I am happy to talk about those. And so mechanical keyboards, it's something that I kind of stumbled upon, and then it turned into something that I just absolutely fell in love with, because I liked the idea of being able to customize something that I was using on my desk. And then I kind of fell into this world of custom mechanical keyboards that has since exploded even in the time I started playing with them, because I've been building and poking around with mechanical keyboards for 5 or 6 years now. And in the past couple years, the hobby has just really increased in popularity, and it's been so exciting to see. And so I've got a couple keyboards on me where some are really clicky, and then some are much more quiet where you probably wouldn't even be able to hear it much, like just quiet stuff like that, as I completely rearranged my desk to show you. It's just a really fun thing to be able to build a tool almost like Legos, but it's actually useful and it lasts a long time. And because you can customize it in so many different ways, I have so many different keyboards for varying different purposes. And it's been a really fun community to be a part of as well, where when I was living in Seattle, I helped organize the Seattle Mechanical Keyboards meetup, and we had like 300 people come to that meetup from all over. People would fly into that meetup, and we could just see each other's keyboards and talk about the latest and greatest in the keyboard world. And it's just been a really cool community to be a part of, and it's fun to design keyboards and just make these very cool customizable things.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it is definitely like a unique hobby that has started exploding. It's interesting how the internet has changed everything, so now you can always find your crew that does similar things, and so it's fun. You talked a lot about focusing on developer advocacy, and even when you were in more traditional engineering roles, you kept leaning back into that, and it seems like you've always been driven toward that direction. I'm curious, how do you think that came about? What made you just want to engage with developers and become more of an advocate rather than go the traditional developer route as much?
I've always loved the idea of using more of my skills than just my coding skills, first of all, just because I know I can provide more than just the code that I write. And also just the tech community, the tech industry has given me so many opportunities that I'm so grateful for, and mentorship opportunities and learning opportunities and job opportunities, all of these things that I wouldn't have gotten if it weren't for amazing people around me who helped guide me along the way. And I want to give back to the community in that way and be that resource for someone where, because they stumble upon something that I might have put out there, they can get a job. And I want people to be able to be successful in this industry, and it's just something that I'm really, really passionate about, because as much as we like to say, well, if you're a good coder, you can make it anywhere, it really is about the people that you meet, the people you interact with, the people who can refer you to different roles and stuff. And so I want to help those people help other people, and I want to be able to give back so that others can continue to give back as well.
And you've kind of been on where you've been both more the traditional developer and developing manager, and then you've been the advocate side. You've sort of been in non-traditional technologist roles and more traditional. So, I mean, do you agree with that? And what, in your view, is a non-traditional technologist?
You know, on one hand, it's very fun to be in these non-traditional roles because I'm like, ooh, I get to kind of pave way and experiment, and it's cool. But then on the other hand, it's really difficult to know what your career trajectory is when you're in mostly unusual roles that not a lot of people have. And so it's both fun and also a challenge sometimes. I was actually just talking to a friend earlier today about how, I'm very happy where I am right now and everything, but I wonder what is next, because I don't actually know. And I can think about where I would like to be, but nothing is really quite the perfect fit, and I'm not sure what these different things will look like. And because of the role where I've been in, I'm very happy to be here. I feel very privileged to be here. There's a very small group of people who I can ask for help whenever I have a career question or a way to go, which is exciting, and it makes for very tight-knit groups of people helping each other, but it definitely can be challenging sometimes.
Yeah, it's like you're sort of pioneering your own path on your own. So it's definitely awesome to chat with people like this, because it's always interesting to see how they think about moving forward. And I really like that you brought up, you don't know what the future holds for you. And it kind of brings me to my next question is, there is more space for people to create these non-traditional paths in technology, but how does one start doing that?
I wish there was a formula, because there isn't really. This is something that I don't think I ever intended to be on a non-traditional path. It was just something that kind of happened, and I've definitely am the guinea pig in my own life, just trying to beta test all these different options. And when I think about what I tell people when they say, oh, well, what if I want to do something like you're doing, or something similar, or I do want to do something more unusual, or something that's hard to find, it's really a matter of figuring out what do you like to do and what don't you like to do? And your don't like to do list is just as important as your do like to do list. Where I know that I really like interacting with developers. I like teaching. I like making content. I love all of that. I know that I don't like writing in certain languages. Like, you could not pay me to write C++. Please, no, never. I'm not interested. Like that kind of stuff. But I also know I don't like being in a culture that is not very good about work-life balance and where there's way too many meetings. There's little things like that where it can really affect how I work, where I've gone through my own personal assessments of work, and I've thought, okay, the times where I've enjoyed my job the most, where I've been most productive over time has been when I, like I said, don't have a lot of meetings, when I'm able to kind of be trusted to just do what's right, and then when I'm given a certain set of goals and I have the creativity to decide how I want to reach those goals. That doesn't work for everyone. My sister, she only works at really large tech companies. She's working at Facebook, she's worked at Google, she's worked at Apple, she's worked at Amazon, she's worked at Microsoft, all the really big FANG companies. And with her, she prefers structure and having a very set environment with very clear goals and being able to help establish those goals, but sticking to it. And I think everybody has their own ways of approaching work and how they approach enjoying work and being successful at work. And so you kind of have to determine how do you work best, and then you can kind of figure out the roles that might fit you.
For sure. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of deliberate decisions of here's what I like, here's what I don't like, and steering away from these, steering towards these. But it's almost like you have to connect dots that nobody else is seeing. And so how have you seen those dots? I mean, like, I'm not saying we have to come up with the formula right now of how others can do this, but I'm just curious, like, what were some of those moments where you're like, oh, I can do this, and started chasing that?
Yeah, and that is a great question, because I've been thinking about that a lot too, where I know that, for example, at some point I would like to be at a point where I can kind of work for a company maybe part-time or not as much, and then the rest of the time is working on my own side projects. I love the idea of that, and so I need to figure out, okay, how can I get to that point? The key for me will be finding a company that is flexible enough where they'd be okay with me going full-time or going part-time eventually. I need to find a company that will let me continue to work on my side projects, because some companies don't like it when you work on side projects outside of work. And it's very difficult to come up with like a 5-year plan for yourself if you're going in a more unusual path or figuring that out, but it genuinely really helps. And so when folks are trying to figure out what are those dots, every company that you go towards can be a step in your journey to what you're finding or what you're trying to find. And sometimes those steps can be really big ones that you want to stay in for a while, but none of these companies are forever. In the tech industry, people don't stay at companies as often for more than 10 years, unlike other industries. And so you have to kind of treat them that way, and it's kind of hard to do because it doesn't feel natural to a lot of us. Like, I know every single company I've worked for, the people have been so great and I wouldn't want to let them down or anything like that. But you also have to remember, I'm trying to figure out how I can get to my goals. I have to figure out, am I on the right path? And if I'm not on the right path, I have to figure out how to switch so that way I'm not going in a direction I don't want to end up in. For example, when I was at Amazon, I loved being able to interact with developers and it was a cool ecosystem and stuff, but I wasn't in a company culture that I liked, and I wasn't working with the type of developers that I'm used to. It was working on Alexa rather than web development. Honestly, there were a lot of things with Amazon where that job wasn't right for me, but I was excited about it because it's a large company, it's a big paycheck, it's a cool job title. But it was a harsh lesson in realizing, like, money doesn't solve everything, and just because it's a cool fancy title that has a lot of prestige doesn't mean it's necessarily the right fit. And so I left Amazon before I hit a year because it just wasn't the right fit for me. You have to be very honest with yourself and kind of constantly evaluate. And for myself, I actively maintain a pros and cons spreadsheet of the company I'm working for and all of the other companies that might be a potential fit, either now or in the future. I change it all the time. Sometimes it's just something where I'm like, I'm writing it down, but I know I don't want to work there. But it's something that I do that really helps me find those dots, like you say.
Yeah, I'm curious how big this list is getting.
I try to add and delete pretty regularly, and so it's not completely massive, but it's one of those things where I'm just like, okay, this role sounds very cool. It's a field I'm interested in. This whole thing sounds great, but it's not. I know that my growth trajectory wouldn't be where I want it to be. Or this company sounds awesome, but it sounds like so many meetings, and I know that I don't thrive a lot in meetings. And this company, there's a lot of unknowns. I need to clarify a lot of things before I would even consider working there. Stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And the way that you're describing it almost sounds like you're really good at saying no to the things you don't like, and then it's more open-ended with the things that you do, like just keeping your options open. Does that sound like an accurate description?
That sounds like an accurate description in an ideal world. I'm getting better at saying no to things that I don't like, and there have definitely been projects where I've taken something on and I'm like, why did I do this? I know I don't like this kind of work. I don't need this on my resume. But then there's other things where, because I said yes to them, even though I probably shouldn't have, it's led to other opportunities. And so it's not a science, it's more of an art, and it's an art that you kind of figure out as you go. But all of this has helped me get a lot better at saying no, even if an opportunity does seem pretty cool, just because it won't be the right fit for where I want to end up.
Sure. What are, in your view, some of the biggest pros and cons of this non-traditional trajectory that you're on?
Biggest pros is that it's fun. I like being able to have a role that's kind of unusual where I can tell people about it, especially if I'm talking to new coders or to students who don't know the possibilities of tech. I can say, this is some of the stuff that I do. And pre-pandemic, I was able to say, I'm going to Croatia this summer and I'm going to Spain and then I go to France and Ireland. Like I was able to travel a bunch and everything. Not so much now. But being able to talk about those really cool possibilities is so fun to tell people who don't know them, and to kind of broaden the horizons of people who might be considering this industry. And I love seeing them take that and run with it. And so many people where I've met them as students and now they're well into their careers and doing amazingly well. It's so cool to see them take advice, not just from me, but from anybody, and run with it and be so successful with it. And so having the non-traditional one, it's most fun to just show people that, and then also just to kind of be able to be creative with what I want my role to be. But the major con, like I mentioned before, is not knowing what to do next sometimes, and not having a lot of people to turn to. Because when you do have a very non-traditional path, and when you do have a role that on paper looks really cool, and a lot of times it is really, really cool, if you say, I'm struggling because I'm not sure where I want to go next, I have to kind of figure this out, sometimes people will be like, oh yeah, poor you have the dream job and you want an even better one, like that kind of thing. And that's never what I mean, but I can see how it could be perceived that way. And so you have to find very specific people who have done something like that, so that way you can really assess those pros and cons with them and really talk about potential growth paths in different ways.
For sure, yeah. I can totally understand what you mean, where it's, if you're talking to someone that hasn't experienced that, they just feel like it's, yeah, like you said, poor you. You have this crazy awesome job that, a handful of people in the world get to have, but you're looking for that next thing. But it is one of those situations where, it's like, what's next? I want to try to keep growing and keep learning. So you got to talk to those people that have experienced this amorphous world of trying to shoot through the dark almost.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's really, there's a phrase that a mentor of mine told me once, lift as you climb. As you are kind of climbing that career ladder or jungle gym or whatever, you bring people up so that way as you move on to the next role, someone else can fill your shoes. And so it's not about me being like, peace out, this job, you were cool for a while, I want to go on to the next one. It's more like, okay, I've lived it, this is awesome, you're going to be in my role next, here's what you need to know, and I'll let you know when I move on to the next one, and that sort of thing.
So we're getting close to time. I wanted to give you a chance to just offer, whether it's broad or specific advice to others that may be looking into this. I realize we kind of covered the ground of there is no formula, but if you were to just offer advice to someone, what would you say?
Yeah, and so really physically write down what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Whether it's in a digital notebook, a physical notebook, a scrap of paper, back of a napkin, actually write it down. Because if you actually see it on paper, you can start to kind of organize it a little bit better in your brain. Because if it's just kind of a muddled pile in your brain, you're kind of just like, yeah, no, everything's fine. But then over time you might be like, oh, I actually am looking for something else. Or you might say, actually, this list is great and I want to stay in my role. Like, really, really write everything down. And then I can't tell you how helpful my own pros and cons spreadsheet is. And it's the same thing where if you write it down and break it down in front of you so you could just straight up read it, it makes it so much clearer about what things are good and what things are bad. And there's a friend of mine where he just left his company after 8 years. He was there for a really long time and he didn't like his job for the past 3 years, but he was just like, yeah, I'm just kind of sticking with it because, I mean, it can't be all bad. But then he wrote everything down and he was just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? Why am I still here for so long? And he got a new job within a month. Granted, he's a more senior person. Obviously, he was at his company for 8 years, but it's something that can only help you to write things down and constantly have that in your mind. Like, you don't necessarily have to settle at a job. If you're content with it, great. And I've been at that point where I've been just like, I'm going to stick around for a little while. But then if there's a point where you start to get the itch of, I need to clarify things, just start writing it down.
I love that. Do you have 2 more minutes and we can go through a few rapid fire questions?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, let's do it. What was your first ever job? Not technology, first ever.
Babysitting.
Oof,
Did
nice.
lots and lots of babysitting.
Yeah. How do you keep your tech skills current?
Lots of newsletters. I read dozens of newsletters every week.
If you could do a TED Talk not on technology, what would you talk about?
Ooh, I have done a TED Talk actually, but it was about technology. And so I guess if I were to do a non-tech one, I don't know if keyboards count as technology. If it doesn't, I would probably do it on jokes or humor or something and levity in the workspace.
Have you ever wanted to quit in technology, and why or why not?
Yes, I have. Harassment and humans. Just which that's a kind of a heavy short answer to give, but I've had some rough times because I am a woman in tech and I have dealt with some things that is probably a fraction of what other people have dealt with, but it still is awful. And also I manage some tech communities, which has been so difficult on occasion, like high risk, high reward kind of thing. And yeah, it has made me want to quit, but these communities and the people around me are the ones that keep me around.
Very valuable, quick lesson you just gave, for sure. What's a secret talent of yours you wish people or more people knew about you?
Oh, dang. I don't know. What do I even do with myself? I can whistle pretty well.
Well, we got to hear it now.
I don't know.
Awesome. What is something you believe in but most people disagree with you in? Doesn't have to be heavy or anything, but
I think that jokes can be perfectly acceptable in a professional environment.
cool. I agree with that, actually.
Yeah, I don't know. Some people might be just like, yeah. And then some people will be like, are they though?
Yeah. I definitely see where you're coming from with that one, for sure. iOS or Android?
I have an iPhone, but I kind of am mad about it. I wish the Apple ecosystem were better because I love the Android ecosystem a ton, but I love the quality of iOS stuff. I'm very torn on it. Bring back Windows Phone. I think that's the solution.
Yep. What's worse, laundry or dishes?
Dishes. Hands down. Laundry, it's like warm and cuddly when you pull it out of the dryer and you can fold it and stuff. Dishes are just slimy.
Yeah. What are you reading or listening to? So book, blog, podcast, whatever you want to call out.
I have started reading 2 books, which I shouldn't have. I should have just done one. But one is called The Poppy War, and then the other one is called Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I really like fiction books. I don't really read a lot of non-technical or nonfiction and technical books.
Well, that does it for all my questions. Cassidy, it's been awesome to have you, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.